Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Have you ever wondered why the Hagia Sophia Mosque in Turkey was built in such manner? Have you ever heard of the Great Mosque of Isfahan? Well, you are in the right seminar and in for a treat. Welcome to our IIMP seminar that we presented by members from Group PBL 10, 11, and 12. This title of the seminar is Islamic Architecture Around the World. My name is Suhaib bin Abdo, metric number 1813507, and I will give you a brief explanation about the outline of the presentation. In this seminar, we will share some of the Islamic architecture throughout the globe, including in Europe, Mediterranean, Central Asia, and also in Malaysia. So, are you ready? If so, let us start. First and foremost, what is Islamic architecture? Generally speaking, the concept of Islamic architecture refers to the characteristic of a building that is used by the Muslim to serve their identity. It is a framework of implementation of Islam which represent the identity of the Islamic culture and civilization. It represents the aesthetic Islamic culture. Islamic architectural thought can be defined as an outcome of an interaction between the religious belief, the custom, and tradition as a self-reference with the surrounding environmental factor. Islam does not eliminate any cultural identity of a community or race, but it is integrated as long as it follows the Sharia. This architectural tradition is predominantly found in two types of places, which are the Muslim majority countries and land that is conquered by the Muslim during the Middle Ages. In addition to Arab states like Algeria, Egypt, and Iraq, Islamic architecture is also prevalent in European region with Moorish root, which are parts of Spain, Portugal, Italy, and also Malta. Islamic architecture is often associated with Islamic mosques. However, this approach to architecture is also apparent in other edifices, from palaces, public building, government's office, to tombs and forts. Moving on to the evolution of Islamic architecture. In distinguishing the Islamic architecture, it appears to be very simple and strict. So this is the concept here, simple and strict, meaning that every part has its function to serve and not just merely for decoration. So two special Islamic architecture in this era that reflect these features are the Quba Mosque and the Prophet's Mosque. In the Quba Mosque, we find example of simplicity in its architecture, and the building of the Prophet Mosque is in the form of a large open courtyard that is covered using palm leaf that is placed on the palm branches, and it stretches the pillar of the palm. Even after undergoing a facelift, the mosque retained its simplicity compared to other mosques in this period. This is a result of having to serve many functions such as a hospital courtyard, a camp for a prisoner, and also a home for some of the companion and Muslim who worships there. After the death of the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ and the end of the succession of the companion marks the end of the era of simplicity and rigor to begin the Umayyad dynasty ruled by the Levant and its capital, Damascus. The next question is, where does the Islamic architecture comes from? Unlike other architecture, the first Islamic architecture originated from the Arabian Peninsula, specifically in Medina. It involved the city planning of along the square, the streets, the style of accommodation, economic and climatic condition, in addition to social custom. The mosque is usually situated in the city center, and the minaret is often high enough to guide a coming passenger. Then, the Islamic architectural revolution spread throughout the cities of ancient world, such as the Roman, the Greek, Byzantine, Asian, North African, and Central Asian cities due to the Islamic spread. New cities such as Samarkand, Bukhara, Istanbul, Cordova, and also Granada were established. The later generation of the Muslim contributed to the expansion of Islamic architecture and civilization. Islamic architecture came into contact with the Byzantine, Hellenic, Sassanid, and the Persian civilization, which were conquered by the Muslims. Impressively, Muslim architecture is unified despite the long distance that separate the Arab state. This can be attributed to the unity of the intellectual sources in the Islamic civilization. So, when does the Islamic architecture develop? It generally extends from 7th to 19th century. Muslims intelligently communicated with other culture by maintaining and integrating rather than destroying them. They steered those cultures to serve Islam and cope with the mainstream of the Islamic world and parallel with the Sharia. For example, statues and pictures were forbidden in architecture of a mosque. So, the Muslim architecture alternatively mastered column, mosaic, pattern, foliage, and engineering decoration to further enhance the decoration of a mosque. They also paid special attention to architectural and aesthetic design, which revolutionized the Muslim architecture. Today, architecture is considered a reflection of a civilization and an open book in which history of a nation is recorded. For example, the Hagia Sophia Mosque, despite being a church in its origin, was not destroyed, but it is turned into a mosque. The building also shows who used to reside within the building, and you can still see some mixture of Islam and Orthodox Christian architecture within the Hagia Sophia Mosque, like the Virgin Mary and the Child mosaic, alongside with the name of Allah and the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. Moving on to the factor of development of Islamic architecture. The first factor is the cultural factor that comprises of 3 components. The first component is the Quran, the Sunnah, and the Islamic creed. The second component is the humanitarian approach of the Islamic culture, where it is not linked to a certain nation or place, but it contains all people and culture that does not oppose the Islamic faith. The third component is a distinctive balance between the physical and the spiritual side. The second factor is the social factor. One of the most important things that characterize the Islamic architecture in general and in housing is the distinction in privacy, which is rather important in Arab tradition. Moving on to the third factor, which is the security political factor. This is a result of aggression and warfare from outsiders. Buildings were clustered and formed facade extending on both sides of the street. This reflected the demands to minimize the number and the size of the entrance. On to the fourth factor, which is the environmental and the physical factor. It comprises of 2 components. The first component is the surrounding environment. Architecture is usually influenced and in accordance with the surrounding environment and the climate. It contains the spirit of the place and the spirit of the time. The desert environment requires a flat roof to withstand the hot climate. Next is the local building material. The usage of raw building material such as wood palm, stones, marble, and treated mud is a common feature in the Islamic architecture. This is because these materials are abundantly available in the Islamic world. Finally is the aesthetic factor. An obvious example is the masharabiyah, which is designed in a distinctive artistic style. To conclude, as the world keeps progressing with time, the development of the Islamic architecture keeps on varying. However, it is known that the architecture of the Islamic world is very much inseparable with the Islamic value and the Islamic culture. Architecture acts as a cultural artifact which plays a significant role as a signifier of a cultural identity. Architecture is able to portray one religion and culture, and the best way to do so is through its religious architecture building. Islamic architecture has always and forever been portrayed through the design of their mosque and building to reflect the spiritual and the theological element that goes with it. And with that, let's move on to our next presenter, Akmal, that will be presenting about the architecture of the Seljuk. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.